This is going to be the fourth video about rational exponents, and I just want to go over a few more examples that I couldn't fit into the third video. So here we go. What I've got here is 3a in parentheses, and that whole thing is raised to the 5/4. And what I want you to see is there's two ways to do this. So, of course, we could say, all right, I'm going to have a radical sign, and the index is going to be this 4, the denominator of my exponent. So I'm taking the fourth root of 3a, that whole thing, to the 5th power. Okay? And what I want to point out is that that's going to be the same. I'm going to need some room. That's going to be the same as the fourth root of 3a, that whole thing in parentheses, raised to the 5th power. Okay? And here's why that's the case. Let's go back to 3a to the 5/4. Okay? Well, what if I want to think of that as 3a to the 1/4 raised to the 5th power? Okay, so I've got this base, this 3a. Its exponent is 1/4, and I'm raising it to a higher power, which means I multiply the 1/4 times that higher power, which is 5, and I would get 5/4. Okay, but now if I have it written in this form, 3a to the 1/4 raised to the 5th, working from the inside of my parentheses outward, I'm going to get this 3a, which I'm going to put underneath the radical sign. The index for my radical sign is going to be this 4. I'm still working inside these parentheses. Okay? So, actually, I'll make a little room for the 4, a little notch. So it's going to be the fourth root of 3a raised to the 5th power. If I raise it to the 5th power, then the 5 goes outside as an exponent for the entire fourth root of 3a. Okay? So what that means is, if you want to, if you've got an exponent with a numerator other than 1, you can do one of two things. As in this example, you can either put that exponent underneath the radical sign, or you can put that exponent as a power raising the entire radical expression. Okay? Now, let's do a variation on this. And this is really pretty easy. Let's say instead of 3a raised to the 5/4, I had 3a to the negative 5/4. Okay, now, something to remember about math is, just because you've learned new rules, it doesn't mean the old rules no longer work. So we had a rule for negative exponents. That rule said that if you have some base with a negative exponent, you can turn that into a fraction so that whatever you had in the negative exponent, with the negative exponent, goes in the denominator. In other words, 3a to the negative 5/4 is the same as 1 over 3a to the 5/4. Okay, now once we've got 1 over 3a to the 5/4, well, the 1 is going to be the numerator of our answer. The denominator is just going to be whatever 3a to the 5/4 is, which we've done before. So we can do that two different ways. We can either write our radical sign, make the 4 as the index, this is all in the denominator, and then put parentheses under the radical sign with a 3a, and raise that to the 5th power. So 1 over the fourth root of 3a, end of parentheses, to the 5th power. Or we could say that's the same as 1 over the fourth root of 3a, and raise that fourth root of 3a to the 5th power. Either way will work. Here's a slight variation on that. And this is just about being careful with your parentheses. Here we have 3a to the 5/4. The thing to realize here is the only thing that's raised to the 5/4 is the a. So we're going to have 3 times whatever a to the 5/4 is. Well, a to the 5/4 is the 4th root of a to the 5th. Or if I wanted to, I could say that's 3 times the 4th root of a, and take that 4th root of a and raise that whole thing to the 5th. And of course, that 5/4 could have been a negative exponent, like 3a to the negative 5/4. So then I would just take the a to the negative 5/4 and make that a denominator. Remember, the 3 is just a 3. The 3 is going to remain in the numerator. So I'm going to have 3 over a to the 5/4. Well, that means I'm going to have 3 over either the 4th root of a to the 5th, or I can write that as 3 over the 4th root of a, and then take that entire root and raise it to the 5th power. Okay, so all of these are just a bunch of different ways to use the basic rules combined with the things you know about exponents and fractions and radical signs and so on already. Okay, so that's about it. Get plenty of practice with this. Just make sure it becomes more or less second nature. And then they become, I think, kind of fun to work. They're just like little challenges that are enjoyable. Okay, take care. I'll see you next time.